Kenny the Pug and the Prophecy of the Eternal Bone. A legend of the realm of Pugmoria. He shall be short of leg and heavy of breath, and yet the realm shall rest upon his wrinkled brow. The Prophecy of St. Biscuitus the Flat-Faced. Chapter Prologue. The realm of Pugmoria. In the age before memory, when the gods still walked among mortal snouts, the great pug sorcerer Bartholomew Snortington forged the eternal bone from pure divine marrow and buried it beneath the roots of the Wrinkle Mountains. It was said that whosoever retrieved the bone would command the loyalty of all creatures, unite the 5 feuding breeds, and bring peace to the realm of Pugmoria, or destroy it entirely, depending on the interpretation. Most scholars preferred not to dwell on the second option. For 300 years, the Eternal Bone had slept. The 5 breeds, the Pug Kingdom of Snoutshire, the Bulldog Barony, the Corgi Confederation, the Dachshund Duchy, and the enigmatic Cat Sovereignty, whose inclusion in a dog-centric prophecy nobody had ever satisfactorily explained, had squabbled and skirmished and occasionally declared war over territories, grazing rights, and the correct pronunciation of the word woof. Nobody had gone looking for the bone, not because they didn't want it, but because the Wrinkle Mountains were very tall, very cold, and had no inns. It was, therefore, with great cosmic irony, that the pug chosen by destiny to find it was Kenny Biscuitpaws, a baker's apprentice from the village of Drool's Hollow who had never left the valley, owned no weapons, and whose primary skill was an uncanny ability to sleep through thunderstorms. Chapter 1. The ordinary morning that wasn't, in which a prophecy arrives with no warning and poor timing. The morning of Kenny's 23rd year began as all his mornings did, with his face buried in a flour sack and his left ear being chewed by the bakery cat, a grey, perpetually annoyed tabby named Grievance. He extracted himself from both the sack and the cat, stumbled to the window, and looked out at Drool's Hollow. The same 47 buildings he had always known, the same cobblestone square, the same fountain shaped like a pug with a fish in its mouth that didn't actually dispense water and never had. It was, by all accounts, going to be a perfectly ordinary day. Then the door exploded inward, and a very old pug fell through it. She was ancient in the way that mountains are ancient, not merely old but foundational, as though the world had been built around her. Her fur was silver white, her robes were covered in runes that occasionally rearranged themselves, and she was carrying a staff topped with a carved bone that glowed faintly purple, which was either magical or a sign she needed a vet. "You," she said, pointing at Kenny with a gnarled paw. "You are the one." "I'm the one who was about to make bread," said Kenny. "The prophecy of St. Biscuitus. I know the prophecy. Everyone knows the prophecy. It's painted on the tavern wall. Then you know it speaks of a pug of short leg and heavy breath. That describes approximately everyone in this village." The old pug, who introduced herself, between dramatic coughs as Archmage Mildred Wobblepaw, 3rd Order of the Ancient Snout, produced a scroll from somewhere inside her robes and unrolled it across Kenny's breakfast table, scattering his rolls. The scroll was covered in elaborate illuminated text, illustrated with tiny pugs in heroic poses, and smelled faintly of cheese. At the bottom, highlighted in gold ink, was a passage that Kenny read 3 times before accepting it was real. "And the chosen shall be known by this sign. He alone shall hear the bones singing in his dreams, and shall wake with flour on his face. And his left ear shall bear the mark of a cat's displeasure. And he shall reside in a building that faces east-northeast, above a bakery, in a village whose fountain does not work." Kenny looked at the scroll. He looked at his flour-covered face reflected in the window. He looked at Grievance, who was watching from a shelf with an expression of profound indifference. "The fountain bit is very specific," he said. "Prophecies often are," said Archmage Wobblepaw. "It cuts down on false claimants." Chapter 2. The party assembled, in which companions arrive, most of them unwanted. By noon, the news had spread through Drool's Hollow with the speed that only truly improbable information can travel, and Kenny had acquired companions. The first was Sir Reginald Flatbottom, a knight of Snoutshire in dented armour, who had been passing through on his way to somewhere else, and had heard the word prophecy from outside the bakery window. He was large for a pug, nearly the height of a medium-sized barrel, and carried a sword he called Marrowcleave. which was absolutely enormous, and which he could swing with impressive accuracy as long as the target was not moving. "I shall accompany the chosen," he announced, entering without knocking and helping himself to a roll. "For glory, for Snoutshire, and because my current quest has stalled considerably." "What was your current quest?" Kenny asked, finding a good hat. "The second was Thistle." No other name given, none required. A small, quick-eyed pug in a grey cloak who materialized from a corner of the room where Kenny had been reasonably certain there was only a broom. She was a ranger, she explained, and had been tracking the movements of something in the Wrinkle Mountains for several months. "Something?" said Kenny. "Something old," said Thistle. "Something that started moving again recently. I believe it's connected to the bone waking." "The bone wakes?" said Archmage Wobblepaw, alarmed. "Did I not mention that?" said Thistle. The third companion arrived just as they were attempting to discuss logistics, and he arrived through the chimney, which nobody had expected. He was a Dachshund, long, low-slung, and carrying more weapons than seemed physically possible for his dimensions. His name was Bertram Longsworth. He was a spy for the Dachshund Duchy, and he had been ordered to either retrieve the eternal bone for his duke or ensure nobody else retrieved it. He seemed, upon reflection, to find the first option more interesting. "I've never been on a proper quest," he admitted, accepting tea. "Espionage is largely waiting in cold rooms." Archmage Wobblepaw surveyed the assembled group with the expression of someone who had expected somewhat more from destiny. "This," she said, "is the fellowship that will either save the realm or end it." "I feel like that range is quite wide," said Kenny. "Welcome to Prophecy," said Wobblepaw. Chapter 3. Into the Wrinkle Mountains, in which the path is difficult and the company is varied. They left Drool's Hollow at dawn the following morning, heading north toward the Wrinkle Mountains, whose peaks were visible on clear days as a jagged line on the horizon that looked, if you squinted, like the top of a very large pug's head. Kenny had packed bread, a bedroll, a good knife for the bread, and a small notebook in which he had been keeping a record of things that seemed important. So far, the notebook contained: Bone is apparently awake, Thistle knows more than she says, Reginald's armor makes noise on cobblestones, cannot sneak, and Grievance watched us leave with what might have been concern, but was probably just hunger. The road north through the folded hills was easy enough for the first 2 days. They passed through the village of Grimple, which had an excellent cheese and a suspicious attitude toward strangers. They crossed the Slobber River on a bridge, guarded by a troll, who, upon learning they were on a prophesied quest, waved them through with an expression of mingled respect and pity. "Does everyone know about the prophecy?" Kenny asked Thistle as they climbed. "The prophecy is 300 years old," said Thistle. "It's been translated into 47 languages. There's a theatrical adaptation.it toured the Bulldog Barony for 6 years. Was it well received?" The second act was considered overlong. On the third day, the mountains began. The Wrinkle Mountains were named either for their folded, layered appearance when seen from a distance, or for the fact that the ancient pug giant who had supposedly created them had done so by sitting down very hard, depending on which historical tradition you consulted. Either way, they were steep, grey, cold, and full of sharp rocks that seemed to relocate themselves specifically to wherever your paw was about to land. Reginald's armor continued to be extremely loud. "We could perhaps," said Thistle through her teeth, "ask the knight to walk slightly farther behind us." "I can hear you," said Reginald. "I have excellent hearing. Eyed is one of my finest qualities." "What are your others?" asked Bertram. "I am very good at looking imposing while standing still." Chapter 4. The Oracle of the High Pass, in which answers are provided, but not to the questions asked. At the summit of the Shivering Pass, where the wind came down from the north, carrying cold and the distant smell of something ancient, they found the Oracle. She had been there, by her own account, for approximately 400 years, and she looked it. She sat cross-legged on a flat rock beside a fire that burned without wood, her eyes closed, her breathing so slow it was nearly undetectable. She was a pug of absolute antiquity, and the stone around her had worn smooth where generations of petitioners had knelt. They approached respectfully, Reginald clanked. The Oracle opened one eye. "I have been waiting," she said, "for the chosen. That would be me, said Kenny. I think. You are, said the oracle. I can tell by the flower. It's from this morning, Kenny said. Old habit. The oracle closed her eye again and was silent for a long moment. The fire crackled. The wind moved. Bertram ate a small piece of jerky as quietly as possible. The eternal bone lies at the heart of the mountain of the first snout, said the oracle. It is guarded by the hound of stone, who will not yield to strength, nor to cleverness, nor to magic, nor to any weapon forged in the last 3 centuries. What will it yield to? Asked Thistle. The oracle was silent again, much longer this time. Bread, she said finally. Everyone turned to look at Kenny. Specifically, said the oracle, without opening her eyes, bread baked with genuine care for a stranger. The hound of stone was made by a god who believed that kindness was the only thing that lasted. All the great enchantments fail. Kindness doesn't. That's the prophecy, said Reginald. The realm is saved by a baker? The realm is saved, said the oracle, by the right person carrying the right thing. It always was. The dramatic framing is for the theatrical adaptation. Chapter 5. The Mountain of the First Snout, in which the true enemy reveals itself, and it is politics. The mountain of the first snout rose from the range like a fist raised toward the sky, or a snout raised toward a particularly interesting smell, depending on your angle. At its peak, visible even from the pass, was the entrance to the ancient cavern, where the eternal bone had lain for 300 years. They were halfway up when they discovered they were not alone. Coming up the southern face, visible through a gap in the clouds, was a column of soldiers, bulldog barony cavalry in their heavy black armor, following a banner that Kenny didn't recognize, a white bone on a dark field with a crown above it. Coming up the eastern slope, Corgi Confederation light infantry, fast and organized, their distinctive red and gold livery bright against the grey stone. And descending from the northern face, which should have been impassable but apparently wasn't, if you were motivated enough, a contingent of tall, silent figures in pale cloaks that Kenny eventually recognized, with considerable alarm, as representatives of the cat's sovereignty. Everyone knows, said Thistle, scanning the mountainside with narrowed eyes. Everyone has always known, said Bertram. The prophecy is famous. Every court in the realm has had agents watching for the signs for years. As soon as word left Drool's hollow. They all mobilized, Kenny finished. The question, said Thistle, is whether any of them can reach the summit before us. They ran. Or rather, Thistle ran, moving across the mountain with the fluid efficiency of someone who had spent years in difficult terrain. Bertram ran low and fast, utilizing the landscape in a way that made Kenny suspect espionage training involved significant amounts of climbing. Reginald ran with tremendous noise and surprising speed, driven by what appeared to be genuine competitive fury. Kenny ran because everyone else was running, and stopping seemed inadvisable. They reached the summit with 17 minutes to spare. The entrance to the cavern was a mouth carved into living stone in the shape of an enormous pug's face. The first pug, the ancient ancestor from whom all the breeds claimed some distant lineage. Before it sat the hound of stone, a dog-shaped figure the size of a cart horse, carved from the grey rock of the mountain, its eyes closed, perfectly still, until they stepped onto the flat summit platform. Then it opened its eyes, which were the colour of deep water, and it looked at them, and it spoke in a voice like boulders grinding together. Name your purpose. We come for the eternal bone, said Kenny. Everyone comes for the eternal bone. What gives you the right to it? Kenny looked at his companions. Reginald was gripping Marrowcleave. Thistle had her hand on her bow. Bertram was calculating something behind his eyes. Archmage Wobblepaw, who had somehow kept pace with them despite being several centuries old, was looking at Kenny with an expression that said, This part is yours. Kenny took off his pack. He reached inside and removed the bread he had made that morning in Grimple before dawn, while the others were still sleeping. He had kneaded it by firelight and baked it in the village's communal oven, and it had come out well, dark-crusted, fragrant with rosemary and old grain. He had made it for no particular reason, as he always did, because bread was the thing he knew how to make, because making something good was its own reason. He walked to the hound of stone and held it out. I don't have a right to anything, he said. I'm a baker. I just thought you might be hungry. You've been sitting here a very long time." The Hound of Stone was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, it lowered its great head and took the bread gently from Kenny's paw. And the doors opened. Chapter 6. The Eternal Bone, in which power is discovered and the question of what to do with it. The cavern was lit by no visible source, and yet was perfectly bright, the way places are in dreams. The ceiling was lost in distance. The walls were carved with the histories of every pug who had ever lived, their faces rendered in extraordinary detail, their stories written in a language so old that even Archmage Wobblepaw only half understood it. At the center of the cavern, on a plinth of white stone, lay the Eternal Bone. It was smaller than Kenny had expected, roughly the length of his forearm. Dot-Eye glowed with a steady golden light, the same color as a candle in a window on a cold night. Dot-Eye did not look like the source of ultimate power. Dot-Eye looked like something you might leave in a bowl for a good dog. He was halfway to it when Bertram's hand landed on his shoulder. "Think carefully," said Bertram, quietly. "Whatever you do with that, it cannot be undone. The realm's power structure shifts entirely. Every court will want it. Every army will come for whoever holds it." "That's why you put it back," said Thistle, from his other side. "The Oracle didn't say you retrieve it. She said you find it." "Those are different, are they?" said Reginald. He sounded, for the first time, uncertain. "We could bring peace. We could end the conflict between the breeds. You could impose a peace," said Archmage Wobblepaw, "which is a different thing. A peace that rests on the threat of absolute power is an armistice, not a resolution." Outside, they could hear the sound of armored figures reaching the summit. Kenny stood before the Eternal Bone and looked at it for a long time. He thought about the fountain in Drool's Hollow that had never worked, and the way nobody had ever fixed it, because it had become, over the years, simply part of the place. Not broken, just itself. He thought about the troll on the Slobber River Bridge, who had waved them through with pity. He thought about bread baked before dawn, for no reason except that it was a good thing to do. He reached out and picked up the Eternal Bone. It was warm. It hummed gently in his paw, not like a weapon, but like something glad to be held. He carried it back to the plinth. He set it down. He placed his paw on it for a moment. "Stay," he said, "not as a command, like you would say it to something you didn't want to leave." The golden light intensified, not blindingly, but warmly, and then faded to a steady, quiet glow. And the Eternal Bone sang, not loudly, just enough to hear if you were still. From outside, through the stone walls of the mountain, they heard the armies of four breeds stop and listen. Chapter 7. The Summit Accord, in which history is made in a somewhat wind-swept location. When they emerged from the cavern, the summit was crowded. The Bulldog cavalry had arrived first, and now stood in formation to the south, watching the cave entrance with their hands on their weapons. The Corgi infantry held the east, the Cat Sovereignty delegation, 3 tall, grey cats who had the ancient quality of people who had seen everything before and found it mildly interesting, occupied a boulder to the north. And then there were the pugs, a small contingent from Snoutshire, having followed Reginald's general direction after he'd left in a hurry. Kenny walked out into the wind and looked at all of them. They looked at him, Dotty the flower still on his coat, Dotty his empty paws. "Where is the bone?" demanded the Bulldog commander. "Inside," said Kenny. "You didn't. I put it back." A silence of considerable weight settled over the summit. "You had it," said the Corgi captain slowly, "and you put it back." "It belongs there," said Kenny. "It's been holding the mountain together for 300 years. You pull it out. Eventually something starts to shift. Besides," he said, and he was not entirely sure where the next words came from, "it's better as a thing that nobody has. Right now, you all came to this mountain for the same reason. That's the first time in 300 years the 5 breeds have been in the same place without immediately fighting." Nobody spoke. The wind moved. The Hound of Stone, still sitting beside the entrance, watched with its deep-water eyes. "There's a tavern in Grimple," said Kenny. "It's reasonably warm, and they do a good stew. I think we should go there and talk." "About what?" said the Bulldog commander. "About the fountain in Drool's Hollow that nobody's fixed, and the bridge troll who's been out in all weathers for a century, and whatever it is the Dakshan Duchy actually needs that they've been trying to get by espionage." Bertram made a small, pained sound. I mean in general terms, Kenny added. The cat's sovereignty delegate, the oldest and greyest of the three, tilted her head and studied Kenny with an expression that he recognized, because grievance had worn it too. Not warmth exactly, but the precursor to warmth, which in cats was already quite a lot. The baker makes an interesting argument, she said. And slowly, with the grinding sound of centuries-old hostility encountering something unexpected, the summit began to move. Downhill, in the direction of Grimple, in the direction of a warm tavern and a reasonable stew. Together. Chapter Epilogue. Drools Hollow, some months later. The Grimple Accords, as they were eventually called, took 11 days to negotiate and resulted in a document that nobody was entirely happy with, which Archmage Wobblepaw said was the sign of a good treaty. The 5 breeds did not achieve peace exactly, but they achieved something that had not existed before, a habit of talking to each other before starting wars, which was, historically speaking, a significant improvement. The Hound of Stone remained at the entrance to the Cavern of the Eternal Bone. Pilgrims still came, from all 5 breeds, to sit with a dot. I did not speak to most of them. Occasionally it would lower its great head and accept something offered, a piece of food, a small carved figure, an honest question. Reginald Flatbottom found his hat, a very good one, wide-brimmed, with a small feather, in a market in the Bulldog Barony, where he had gone as an informal ambassador following the Accords. He remained there for several years, which was useful because his natural tendency to clank loudly while entering rooms turned out to be an asset in formal diplomatic settings. Thistle vanished back into the mountains, as rangers do, but could occasionally be found in the high passes when something needed watching, her grey cloak indistinguishable from the stone. Bertram Longsworth submitted a resignation to the Dakshan Duchy. Citing a change of vocation, he became, improbably, a cartographer, mapping the Wrinkle Mountains with a thoroughness that had previously been considered impossible for someone of his dimensions. His maps were excellent. Archmage Wobblepaw retired to a tower somewhere. Occasionally her letters arrived, written in runes that rearranged themselves if you read them too slowly. Kenny always read them carefully. Kenny went home to Drools Hollow. He reopened the bakery. He baked bread in the morning and sold it through the window and listened to the village talk. People came from farther away now, some out of curiosity about the baker who had held the eternal bone and set it down, some because the bread was genuinely very good. With some of the fee the Snoutshire King sent him, which he accepted after considerable hesitation and the firm advice of everyone he knew, he paid for the fountain to be fixed. On the first morning it worked. The whole village came to watch the water run. It was not a dramatic thing, it was water from a stone fish falling into a basin, but people watched it for a long time anyway. Kenny stood at the back of the crowd with grievance on his shoulder, watching the water catch the light, and felt the specific satisfaction of a thing being what it was supposed to be. Not a chosen one. Not a legend. Just a pug who had been in the right place at the right time, and had known, when the moment came, that the right thing to do with extraordinary power was to leave it where it belonged and go home and make bread.
If you wish to join this grand adventure, leave a comment below, and be sure to subscribe for more epic quests.